Welcome everybody to Watching the Hawks. I am Tyrel Ventura.
And I'm Misha Cross.
And joining us now to discuss the rise of online news and its pundits are the hosts of the YouTube political commentary channel, The Vanguard, Gavin Miller-Broomfield and Zach Polston. Zach and Gavin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So I got to ask, look, you are both young college-age kids. I say kids because I'm 41, going on 42, living in the middle of the United States, who are now spending a good portion of your time hosting The Vanguard on YouTube. I got to ask, what inspires and drives young folks like yourselves to jump into the world of online punditry, podcasting, and news commentary? Why do you guys suddenly do this? What made you guys decide to do this?
Well, thanks so much for having us, and just wanted to say, we're honored to be here and glad to be part of the conversation. But yeah, to get things started, I think that it's fair to say that this country is full of people with really diverse views. I grew up surrounded by a lot of different people, even in the middle of the country, a lot of different folks with a lot of different opinions that honestly came from a lot of different backgrounds that weren't being represented on the mainstream news, on the kind of traditional media, which most people would consume. I think a show like ours and a show like many others online reflects that diversity. The internet has in many ways democratized the way we consume media and the way we create media. And it's allowed for many channels like ours at the Vanguard to really flourish under those conditions. Because again, people want to see something new. They want to see their unorthodox viewpoints reflected in the media they watch. And they don't want it to be boring and monotone like so much of what is fed to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if I could just pick up where Gavin left, the young people that are entering into this field, because old media doesn't exist to us. I can't tell you a single person who's 23 like me and Gavin that gets their news from MSNBC, CNN, Fox, insert legacy outlet. Everybody gets their news from either Twitter or YouTube, right? So why would you not go to where the people are? We had the privilege of talking to Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Glenn Greenwald on our show, and he basically spelled out that if nobody's reading your journalism, it doesn't matter. It's not making the change that you set out to do it. So instead of trying to moralize and preen to people, we've just kind of gotten into the mud, started having conversations that we think people actually want to have, and trying to frame it in a way that's exciting, that'll attract viewers.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and along those same lines, why do you believe so many news consumers are now going to these online platforms? You spoke about, the move of younger people being more interested in, or not even getting their news from these traditional media sources. I'd argue, as somebody who graduated college in 2009, the majority of people I went to school with wasn't getting them from those news sources then either. So why do you think now we've seen this explosion of YouTube and places like Spotify to fill news and commentary needs, and not just for young people? We're seeing people outside of the millennial and Gen Z group that are also getting their news from these sources.
Well, quite simply, in my opinion, it would be the explosion of online culture. Everyone is online, and especially in the post-pandemic age, everyone has kind of been exploring the internet to some degree or another, I believe to be the case. And if you spend enough time on the internet, you'll quickly realize that it's not just these mainstream establishment news sources, which you have to rely on for your information. You can branch out. You can explore other corners of the information sphere and find hosts that are more in alignment with yourself and your views. Now, this has led to some problems, at least in this country, with the fracturing of different people's viewpoints and a polarization that we've seen. But ultimately, I think that that's a con you have to weigh with the pros, because I think it's better in the long run if everyone is listening to a media source that reflects their views, that people are getting news that they feel like reflects their beliefs, rather than everyone just getting their news from the same 3 channels or the same 1 channel, God forbid.
I want to drop this in here. One of the most fascinating aspects, I think, of this kind of new wave of news and punditry online has been the introduction of direct fighting between online commentators and news jockeys. I mean, we've seen this play out over and over again since the early days. When I was on YouTube doing this job, you saw this play out. But most recently, we've seen it with like the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur and Jimmy Dore battling it out over social media. Are these kind of battles one of the reasons you think people are also flocking to these platforms, not just to get news, but to be entertained by this kind of infighting and insult hurling? I mean, look, we don't see Wolf Blitzer dropping WWE-style promos and insults on Tucker Carlson on cable news, at least not yet. Do you believe that fighting and those personalities battling each other are another reason that people are flocking to these news sources?
Absolutely, but I don't think it's all that much different than the modern political lexicon in the modern arena. Trump was very, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Tyrel, he was very influenced by professional wrestling lore, right? The idea of being the heel in politics. And I think that that created a seismic shift in American politics, right? When I was 18 and I was first covering politics in high school in a serious way during the Trump election, we were all obsessed with this turn in the way that his boorish, oafish behavior was actually, attracting a larger crowd. And I think that, people have seized upon the fact that if you want to reach people at all in this space, then you do kind of have to steep it in this infotainment, right? And Gavin and I are completely clear that that's what our channel represents, is infotainment. We're not Wankler Cronkite style reading the news. We're two dudes that are just kind of giving our opinions and providing our commentary and our perspective. And I think that trying to walk that line and creating these kinds of beefs, battles, it's a good framework for people to understand real political issues. So you mentioned Jimmy Dore and Cenk Uygur. The crux of that, beef has been, their coverage of Syria. It has been the fact that they've taken, millions of dollars in investment from private equity firms while they've pretended to be this progressive news. So this is a really substantive disagreement that you can really flesh out the policy-wise. But yeah, I do think it's beneficial to create two kind of like action figures that are battling it out, quite simply because it's the only way to engage an audience to have the conversation.
And after January 6th and the reign of Donald Trump, as you just spoke about, we've definitely seen a government-endorsed corporate push to introduce more control and regulations over online political speech. How do you believe this push will affect news commentary and punditry online, and even the types of work that you both do?
Well, we've already seen it massively come into play, quite frankly, with many of our colleagues suffering the effects of demonetization or outright suppression in the algorithm coming from YouTube and these other big tech giants. One of the scarier effects, one of the more haunting long-term effects that I see this having on this space is that it's really preventing people from getting involved to begin with. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to or that we've talked to on the show that have told us that they would love to similarly do a podcast where they talk politics, but they're so afraid after hearing all of these horror stories about algorithmic suppression and general censorship coming from big tech that they feel like it's a fool's errand, that they'd be speaking into the void, shouting off a cliff, essentially, and that it wouldn't prove to be fruitful. Luckily, at the Vanguard, we figured out some ways to get around that for the time being, but it certainly has a sobering kind of effect when you think about in a long-term sense how this could really affect independent media, investigative journalism, the kind of information brought to us that we've relied upon for so long to bring us some of the most important stories in modern American history.
Zach and Gavin, I got to say you're doing great work out there, and thank you so much for coming on the show today and educating our audience. It's truly a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was our pleasure, Tyrel. Thanks so much.